Hello, and welcome to Thin Air, a podcast dedicated to telling the stories of the missing with new episodes every 2 weeks. Thin Air is hosted by me, Daniel Calderon.
And me, Jordan Sims. We are two friends and writers who wanted to share the stories of those left behind and the social issues that surround these haunting cases.
For more information about us and our podcast, check out thinairpodcast.com, where you'll find blogs on all our episodes, links to our sources, and more.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Blue Apron. Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/thinair. You will love how good it feels and tastes to create incredible home-cooked meals from blueapron.com/thinair. Want to support our podcast directly? Head on over to patreon.com/thinairpodcast. We've recently been working on Patreon-exclusive mini episodes, available for only $5 a month. These mini episodes let us discuss topics and cases that just don't quite fit into our regular episodes. We also get to explore extra content and commentary on episodes we've done before. For example, 2 weeks ago, our mini episode was more on David Snedden and included extended interviews and our thoughts on the recent return and death of North Korean detainee Otto Warmbier. We wanted you guys to get a sense of what these episodes are like, so here's a clip from that episode. If Trump did personally assure Otto's return, as Tillerson claims, why like this and why now? And what conversations are happening about Americans in North Korea? To me, the most likely thing to happen was that Otto was returned by North Korea once they realized he was gravely ill. As Greg said, you can't have him actually die there because that would look terrible, which to me is strange because doesn't it look terrible already? Anyway, it's hard for me to view Trump as being responsible for Otto's return, but even if he was too late. Trump was too late. All of that aside, I did email and tweet Donald Trump to do or say something about David Snedden. If Trump is doing what he says he is, he can bring up the issue of Snedden, and he can also help this issue in a way that Obama apparently couldn't or wouldn't, depending on who you ask.
In addition to these exclusive mini episodes for $5 a month, you'll also get your very own copy of interactive episode transcripts, with links to our sources, pictures, and more, all for your reading pleasure. So what are you waiting for? Check us out over at patreon.com/thinairpodcast.
What exactly happened on June 21st, 1977, the day 31-year-old Charlotte Moriarty and her 6-month-old son disappeared, isn't exactly clear, and the details of what happened that day wouldn't emerge for decades. What we do know is that morning, around 9 a.m. in Hauula, a city near Honolulu, Hawaii, Charlotte put her infant son Marx, that's Marx like Karl Marx, M-A-R-X, into a stroller and took him for a walk to a nearby store. All of these details were later reported to police by Charlotte's boyfriend at the time, and father to Marx, a man named Mark Barnes. Around 1 p.m. that day, Mark told police that he found his son's stroller abandoned at a nearby bus stop. This would be the last physical sign of Charlotte and her baby. A frustrating aspect of this story is how little media attention it received. We talk about that on the podcast a lot. I scoured the archives of Honolulu's local papers for stories about them written at the time they went missing, and I couldn't find anything. Not one story or blurb about the missing mother and son appears to have been written then. Some of the only information I could find about Charlotte and baby Marx's disappearance wasn't published until a 2001 article in the Honolulu Star Bulletin, which is when her family contacts a psychic and the media about their case. There was a lot of later speculation, and for a long time, Mark was considered suspicious by many who knew Charlotte. He didn't report them as missing until July 10th, almost 20 days after they disappeared. He said, to quote that same 2001 article, Charlotte had been missing on several private occasions, but she had returned all right, end quote. Also, in his initial report to police, Mark noted that Charlotte may have been struggling with mental health issues, claiming that she had been seeing a psychiatrist, and he was, quote, afraid that she was not able to care for Marks in a competent manner. Charlotte's family disputed a lot of the information Mark initially provided to police and asserted that she wouldn't disappear at that time, especially considering that her 8-year-old daughter, who she had shared custody of, was coming to visit her around the time she went missing. They also state that Mark incorrectly reported certain aspects of this story, like Mark's age and his relationship to Charlotte. He claimed they were married when they weren't. In 2001, Charlotte's sister Patricia hired a psychic to try and learn what had happened to Charlotte and baby Marks, which is when the Honolulu newspaper picked up the story. Patricia said in that article, quote, "My sister and her son are dead. They didn't just disappear." The psychic indicated that they both had died violently and were buried on the, quote, windward side of Oahu. It was clear from the article that both Charlotte's sister and daughter believed that Charlotte and Marks, whose full name was Marks Panama Moriarty Barnes, were dead and had met violent ends. And this is where the disappearances of baby Marks and mother Charlotte stayed, with very little information and a cloud of suspicion around Mark. That is, until January of 2011, when a Philadelphia man named Steve Carter decided to visit and search the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's online database. That's when he saw, for the first time, a picture of himself as a baby. That baby was Marks Panama. And that was the moment Steve Carter discovered that he had been considered a missing person for nearly 34 years.
I went in, I plugged in Hawaii, plugged in male, and I plugged in missing for 33 years. Because I had just turned 34. So I thought, probably been missing about 33 years. And then what I got in return was, I think, 5 or 6 people, all Native Hawaiians, and nobody really looked like me. Yeah, I took a second. I was like, well, I just turned 34. Maybe if I change it to 34, I'll get a different return. When the picture of Marks came up.
Did you instantly recognize yourself?
It was an age progression photo of what I looked like at 28. It was quite, it was pretty much spot on. The image they had was, it was really striking. And then as you went through the description, it said Mark's missing at 6 months, which is right around the same time I turned up in an orphanage. His birthday is January 17th. My birthday is January 16th. So everything just started to click.
Something that was really amazing to me was that Steve found all of this out during his lunch break.
I was at work. Yeah, my office door closed, and it was an amazing feeling. It's tough to explain when you're adopted and you don't know who your parents are. You've never really been interested, and then all of a sudden, within a matter of minutes, you find out exactly who you are. It's surreal. Immediately tried to reach out to my wife, and then I started reaching out to my friends and my parents. Started to get the ball rolling, and actually later that day I reached out to police to let them know that, I believed I might be the person in the photo, and that's what really culminated in me becoming Marks Moriarty.
The story of how Marks became Steve Carter began when he was adopted from an orphanage in Hawaii in the early 80s.
My parents were military, and they'd been stationed in Hawaii, and that's when they decided they were going to adopt. The adoption agency, they got a hold of my parents, said we have a 3.5-year-old Caucasian Native Hawaiian boy who's looking for adoption. Would you be interested in meeting him? And That's when I met my parents. Two of the most caring people you'd ever meet. My mother is a school teacher. My father is ex-military, a lawyer, very involved in the community, very involved in the church, and just great role models.
How Steve made it to the orphanage in the first place is somewhat unclear. According to a 2012 People article, Charlotte was, quote, taken to a psychiatric hospital and Marks was placed into protective care. A few days later, she left against medical advice, leaving her son to become a ward of the state. This would have been shortly after the two went missing, when Marks was around 6 months old.
As soon as I kind of identified myself as Marks Panama, you began doing searches on the internet, trying to get as much information as possible, and that's where I kind of got the backstory. There's always talk of postpartum depression. You're talking about Hawaii in the 1970s. So a number of different things that could have gone on. When talking to my half-sister who knew her, she was 8 years old when I went missing and when her mom went missing. To talk to her, she was the light of her life, very full of life, funny, smart, beautiful, would never just pick up and disappear. There was too much to live for. I think in the end, it might have just been too much. After having children of my own, I know that after 6 months of dealing with a baby, it can be a lot. It can be very taxing. And, my heart goes out to anybody who has to deal with that on their own or, isn't prepared to deal with what comes next.
Until he was 3, Marks was only available as a foster child, and his eventual parents wanted a full adoption. So Marks was in an orphanage in state custody for 3 long years before he was adopted. How the orphanage and psychiatric facility didn't connect the dots between Charlotte and baby Marks' disappearance is unclear, but as I noted before, this was not a highly publicized case at the time, and information about them may not have been available. There may have been no dots to connect, which is strange. Maybe because of Charlotte's history of going missing, police simply thought she would show up with baby Marks. Whatever the case was, when we asked Honolulu police for an interview, they claimed that even though the case is an open investigation, there was no one available to talk to us about this case. What was your adopted parents' reaction to this news?
They were, I don't even know how to describe it. They wanted to make sure that I knew it was a legal adoption. Everything they did was legal. And I think they were nervous to think that I thought that maybe they had taken me when I completely knew that if you ever met my parents, you'd realize breaking the law in any way is totally against their court. But she wanted to let me know, we did everything we could. Here are all your adoption records. I was like, I get it, Mom. No need. But then they were just kind of awestruck.
Other articles, including one from CNN, noted that when he was placed into the orphanage, whoever placed him there, and I think it's likely that that person was in fact Charlotte, gave him a different name, which was Tenzin Amiya. Charlotte remains missing.
Still have yet to find out what has happened to her. When we did the People magazine article, the same gentleman from the National Center of Missing Exploited Children who did my age progression photo performed an age progression photo of her, of what she would look like at 65. And that was actually run in the article as a chance to try to locate her as well. I know my sister still has hope that she's out there and that someday they'll be able to find her. But nobody really knows what happened to her.
After discovering his identity as baby Marks, Steve was also able to speak with his biological father, Mark.
It was probably one of my most difficult conversations I've had. I can easily talk for quite some time, and I was at a total loss. Didn't really know what to talk about, how to approach the subject, how to gauge his reaction, and didn't know any of the backstory. So it was quite a difficult conversation. The first thing he said to me was, how's your mom? And I was like, I was going to ask you the same thing. I have no idea. And I think he was kind of flabbergasted by the fact that she hadn't taken me and we hadn't been living somewhere.
In an interview that came out with Mark Barnes after Steve's identity was confirmed, Mark, who we tried to contact for an interview but did not respond, said, quote, I am elated. It's a miracle. This totally gives hope to everyone with a missing child." End quote. One has to imagine that he feels somewhat vindicated since Steve has been found alive.
My father was a main suspect in the case, and nobody really knew what happened. And the fact that it was weird to kind of read through all these, message boards about, finding different people and what do you think happened and all this other stuff without anybody really knowing that that person has been found. Like, you almost want to chime in on the message board and be like, guess what? I got your theory for you.
An important reason why Steve decided to go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website in the first place was the story of another missing infant whose name was Carlina White.
It really culminated right after the Carlina White case in 2010. That is when I identified the picture on the missingkids.com website.
What about her story really stuck out to you? What did you find fascinating about it?
Just that she was able to find herself from a picture based off her at the age of, I think, 12 or 18 days. But it wasn't until we started thinking about having kids that I really started wondering about my medical history. And when her story popped up, that she had no idea, and, it kind of struck me as strange, and it came up 3 or 4 times that day. And at that point, I was like, well, you know what? Nobody really knows how I ended up in an orphanage or why I was there or anything surrounding it. So just on a lark, decided to go to the website.
Carlina had been taken from a hospital when she was only 19 days old. This happened in New York City. A woman posing as a nurse stole her and raised her as her own, giving her the name Nettie Nance. Carlina had no idea that the woman who raised her wasn't her birth mother until she got pregnant herself. That's when she discovered that her birth certificate was forged. After her daughter was born, Carlina began asking more questions. She searched the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's database for herself, and that's where she found a picture of herself as a baby, as well as an age-progressed photo that looked somewhat like her. This is when she knew that she, much like Steve Carter, had been born someone else. Both of these stories, Steve Carter and Carlina White, really got us thinking about the nature of infant abductions. Of all missing persons cases, infant abductions are particularly haunting because, as was the case with both Carlina and Steve, the infant who becomes an adult may not be aware they're even considered a missing person. Fortunately, we were able to speak with someone who could help us provide some context in these unique missing persons cases.
My name is Katie Spina. I am the program specialist for Project Alert and Infant Abduction Response at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Found on their website is a crucial document called Infant Abduction Statistics, which traces data in these cases from 1965 to May of 2017. This document was the focus of our interview. The first thing we discussed was that these types of missing persons cases, as officially reported, are rare, but this may be an underreported issue. Katie is going to reference NCMEC here, which is the acronym for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
They're not as common as you probably might think. We're looking at probably an average of 3 to 4 infant abductions per year. That does include the 3 locations that we are tracking, so it's hospitals, home, and other. You have to remember that our stats are only based on information that is either being reported to NCMEC or that we're finding through the internet. So if there's an infant abduction that is not being documented somewhere in the media or on social media, or we're not getting a report from law enforcement or maybe the family, we don't have record of that. So our 3 to 4 is just based on what NCMEC knows.
Katie also noted that the infant abductions described in this particular document do not include familial abductions, which is where a case like Steve Carter / Baby Marks would be placed.
If you're referring to kind of like a family abduction, that's usually somebody that is either a mother, a father, or a grandmother outside of maybe a boyfriend or a girlfriend of the mother. Those are family abductions. We do track those here at NCMEC. They aren't included in these particular stats, but we do see infants abducted from family members or somebody close to the family.
In other words, the purpose of this report would be to provide information about non-familial infant abductions, abductions like Carlina White, who was taken by a stranger. This document notes patterns seen in these particular kinds of abductions. Since 1965, a noticeable trend is that infant abductions have been on the decline. An important reason for this is that hospitals, one of the places infant abductions are likely to occur, started to take serious safety precautions.
There has been a decrease in infant abductions from hospitals, and I think a great deal of the decrease has come with increases in technology and security. Hospitals, they now issue specific staff badges that are specific to mother and baby units. They might be coded pink, or they might have like a baby footprint. So it's very specific to the hospital and specific to that unit. They have electronic tagging systems for infants. So if they get close to a door, an alarm goes off and shuts down the unit. Then the one last thing that hospitals have actually done in terms of preventing these abductions is actually educating parents. And I think that has been lacking in the past is now they teach parents when they come in for prenatal care, they actually start their training there. And then when the baby goes into the mother-baby unit, they take the time to educate the parents on making sure they ask questions, asking to see badges when a nurse comes in, make sure that they know that babies shouldn't be arm carried and that they will always be transported in bassinets. And then they also take the opportunity to educate the parents on social media and make sure that if they're going to post things, keep it very vague, keep it general. You don't need the full name, hospital, all that location information, because a friend of a friend could easily look at a post and see a baby information from somebody else if they don't keep their information private.
The NCMEC report also provides a list of characteristics of a typical infant abductor, a woman of childbearing age who doesn't want to harm the baby, but wants to raise it as her own.
They want a baby. They are usually of overweight that appear to be pregnant or make somebody else believe that they'd be pregnant. They have that instinct to be a mother. When they're looking for a baby and they attempt to abduct a baby, it's primarily for keeping a relationship going. So they've lied to a significant other or partner that they are either married to or are living with. And they use their manipulative behavior to kind of keep that person in the relationship. So we haven't seen too many males be the main abductor. There might be a male accomplice, but for the most part, they're all female abductors. They may have experienced a miscarriage or a loss of a baby prior to the abduction, so it could be a stillbirth or the child was taken away. So it could be, there usually is some kind of loss involved prior to the abduction. That's actually common in some of the ones that we've seen recently. And then they usually are familiar with the area and they frequent hospitals or the healthcare facilities in the community. So they're almost like, they're kind of like shoppers. They look around and they specifically target those particular hospitals, and they're very familiar with the facility and their surroundings.
Another trend that I noticed was that most of these cases, they don't usually involve harming the child or violence. Does that imply that these infants are being cared for by their abductors in the long term?
I mean, we've had some really big recoveries when it comes to infants. Carlina is one of them. We're seeing a lot of these. The primary reason to take these babies is to care for them as their own. There is no ulterior motive. There's no sexual gratification out of abducting infants. It's simply just to replace almost a void, primarily just to keep the baby, raise them as their own, and live out the life with a child. We do have still missing infants in our database, and I think there is a chance that there are many more potential recoveries after a long period of time.
This was a major idea that stuck out to us, that these cases, while so tragic, seem to have a good chance of being solved. Since these cases aren't likely to involve violence, not every case, but in most, infants who were taken as a child are likely to have made it to adulthood because they're being raised and cared for. As these infants become teenagers and adults, they start to ask the same questions that Carlina and Steve did. So today, we look at one of these cases up close, a case of infant abduction that has yet to be solved, in the hopes that this baby, who was born David Blockett in 1980, is out there looking for answers today. Join us for David's story right after this short break.
This episode of Thin Air is brought to you by Blue Apron, a better way to cook. I love making Blue Apron meals at home. With each meal, I become a better chef, learning new techniques in the kitchen to prepare and cook my food. One of my recent favorites was their chicken and honey glazed peach with sweet potato, spinach, and Thai basil. It was delicious and easy to make. The recipe called for preparing the sweet potatoes in coconut milk. The taste was incredible, and I couldn't believe I had never thought to do that before. Some of their upcoming meals include seared chicken and tomatillo salsa and Caribbean chicken curry. They also have vegetarian options each week, like sweet corn and pepper empanadas, and whole grain pasta and peas with ricotta cheese and mint. To get your first 3 meals for free with free shipping, go to blueapron.com/thinair. Thanks again to Blue Apron for supporting this podcast. If you want to support us as well as eat delicious home-cooked meals, redeem our offer by going to blueapron.com/thinair.
David Ezell Blockett was born in Newport News, Virginia on November 26, 1980. 15 days later, on December 11th, he would be taken, never to be seen by his family again. Vanessa, David's mom, was young when she had him. At 16, she gave birth to her first son, Frederick.
Me and my mom was close because we grew up together. When people see me and her, they used to think that I was her brother. And she'd tell them that I was her son. We grew up close, tight, like brothers and sisters, even though that wasn't the case. My mom was 16 when she had me, so she was still living with my grandparents. Basically, I just stayed with my grandparents growing up, mom young. So, it wasn't really much, grandparents took care of you. My name is Frederick Blockett, and my brother is David Blockett.
At the time, Vanessa was in a relationship with a man named Fred West, who was David's father, but not Frederick's. Fred and Frederick didn't exactly get along.
Nah, I never really had any relationship with Fred because he wasn't my father, but it was just some things that happened between me and him, him and my mother, that I didn't like when I was growing up. So I really didn't have a relationship with him at all. To be honest with you, I kind of didn't like him at all because I saw my mom go through a lot of things dealing with that dude.
On the day that David went missing, the family was at home when a woman knocked at the door. Fred West, David's father, was in prison during this time.
So Vanessa Blockett, a teenager, she was a teen mom. She was at home with her 2 boys. David was just 2 weeks old, a little baby. My name is Jessica Larche. I'm a morning anchor and special projects reporter at WTKR News 3.
In 2011, Jessica took on David's story as a multi-part series to help it get more media coverage.
I could not believe the lack of media coverage on David's case when it happened and in the years since. That drove me even more to want to do the story. Because I just couldn't believe it. I said, this little baby was stolen from his home, and I thought I was going to find a treasure trove of previous stories, and I found the opposite. That was really heartbreaking because you have to imagine Vanessa and her family had to have been begging for coverage. I know that they've always asked questions, and Frederick has too. When we reached out to him in 2011, it caught him off guard. I reached out to the Newport News Police Department, and I said, hey, is this still an open case? And they said, no one's looked into it, and I think at that point it had been over a decade, even more than that. And so, I started digging and asking questions, and it's just an incredible story.
Back to that day, which is December 11th, 1980. That's when a woman knocks at their door.
I remember Vanessa saying that she could tell it was it looked like a wig that the woman had on, sharp cut bangs, high arched eyebrows. I believe she had on a gold necklace, brown skin, large hips, a full-figured woman. And it seemed to Vanessa that the woman may have been like in her 30s at the time.
And you got to imagine, even though she was getting help from her parents, she was overwhelmed. The woman comes knocking at the door, and she looks official. This woman looks official. She's got on a badge. She has a clipboard, and she says, I'm Marie Kelly with the Department of Social Services, and I want to take the boy to. She said it was a Christmas cute baby contest, something along those lines, and that's how she was able to get Vanessa to let her children go. And apparently the woman convinced Vanessa that all the other children in the neighborhood are going, the kids will enjoy it, and that's how she was able to convince her. And so it's quite sad. She thought she was sending her kids to a good time. And there's the other information that apparently the woman made conversation with Vanessa about she had children of her own, and she was having problems with her husband, and all these things. So she really, really tried to befriend Vanessa and make Vanessa feel like she was confiding in her.
We can't ask Vanessa what this woman was like and what the story was that she told exactly. Vanessa passed away in 1997 from an aneurysm at the young age of 35. Whatever this woman said exactly, Vanessa clearly didn't think that this woman meant her child any harm and allowed the woman to take both David and Frederick.
You think a 19-year-old, she's got her babies with her. This woman looks official. She seems caring, and Vanessa says, it's okay. You got to think, this is the early 80s at the time, and there's not that heightened sense of awareness, that heightened sense of, people having criminal minds out there. So there was an apt to trust people more. And so I can see how she felt comfortable allowing this official-looking woman to take her babies to a contest that was, not very far from their home in Newport News.
Anytime social workers come to your house saying that they're social workers and they're taking you places, that's just kind of odd. And I don't realize why my grandmother didn't pick up on it. But back in those days, everybody was caring and loving and opening their doors to strangers. So, she wouldn't have picked up on it, especially if you have the right credentials, you're wearing the right uniform and everything else. She's not going to pick up on it. Nowadays, I think we are more strict when it comes to people coming to our house talking about taking our kids places now, and we don't know them. We run background checks right then, checking Facebook accounts, online, and everything. All that stuff is handy right now, But back in the days, it wasn't like that.
Frederick, who was only 3 at the time, went with a woman who would take his brother. He remembers a car ride and a man who was driving.
I just remember being in the back of the car, and there was a cassette tape. And I was just pulling the tape out of the cassette tape while my brother was sitting there beside me. And the lady that I saw, I remember a guy, he was facing forward. He had like a medium afro. And the lady had like a nurse's outfit on with the nurse's head and everything. And that's all I just remember the back of their heads. They never really turned around and really said anything to me. And if they did, I couldn't remember.
Frederick doesn't think that the woman and man were interested in him, but rather wanted his infant brother.
They didn't really want to take me. They wanted the baby. They didn't really want me because I was a little bit older. And it's easier when you're a newborn baby because you don't know who your parents is or who your daddy is. You just know who raised you. So it was easy for them to keep the baby. And me knowing who my parents was and who my daddy was, it was kind of hard.
The woman in the car, do you remember what her attitude was like? Did she speak to you in any negative way or in any way at all that you can remember?
No, they didn't really speak at all. From what I recall, they didn't really speak at all. I mean, when they was driving, they just kept their head forward, I guess because they didn't want me to see their face. So they just kept their head pointed forward. They didn't really speak at all.
As was later confirmed, there was no contest that day, and there was no woman named Marie Kelly who worked for the Department of Social Services. At some point later that day, they dropped Frederick off in an area close to Newport News called Hampton, which was then underdeveloped farmland. According to reports, Frederick is found wandering the streets with a note pinned to his shirt. The note had his home address written on it. What Frederick remembers is not of being dropped off randomly, but at a specific house.
I had to talk to the police, but I don't remember talking to them. I know most of the talking was my mom and my grandmother because they knew more than what I did because they just put me out somewhere in Hampton with a note attached to me. And they said some lady found me. I don't know who the lady was. I can't recall, but it was a lady that found me wandering the streets, took me to a house. But see, I remember being dropped off at a person's house, and they telling me to knock at this door, and I knocked at the door. That's what I remember as a child. I don't remember wandering in the street, but they said when they found me wandering in the street. I don't remember that. I remember specifically being dropped off at somebody's house, and they told me to go up there and knock on the door.
When Jessica interviewed Frederick for her story in 2011, she couldn't believe how much he remembered from this event at such a young age.
So grateful that he was willing to share his story because his recollection of that day is impeccable. He even mentioned that when we talked in 2011 that he wished he could remember more, but I'm amazed at what he remembers already. And I know that has been a great help.
In asking you what you remember about that day, I wonder, do you ever feel frustrated that you don't remember more?
I do. They did want to do hypnosis with me when I was younger, but they didn't. But see, this is a thing that the mind does to help you remember traumatic stuff. You end up dreaming about it. So I done had a couple of dreams of this thing, and it's not understanding why the dreams keep coming up. But I done had a couple of dreams about me being in the back of the car with me and my brother, growing up in my adulthood. So it's like my mind wants to open up and show me a little bit more. I don't know. I done dreamed about it so many times. I remember getting put out, and where I was put out was a whole lot of silos. The area that I was in was silos and white picket fences. It was a farmland, a farm area. That's what I remember. But them are like little bits and pieces that come to me, every once in a while. At a flash in my mind. But, as far as the whole situation, I don't remember.
And the day passes. And Vanessa starts to get worried. And she's like, where are my kids? What's going on? And then the police call and say, hey, we found your son, Frederick, roaming around near this farmland type of area. But David was not with him. And you have to imagine the panic Vanessa felt. Grateful that Frederick is okay, but oh my God, what has happened to David?
So your mother, what did she tell you later about what happened? Did she describe the woman to you or anything that happened? How did she explain it?
She really didn't describe anything because it was like, she was still had hope for David. She was doing stuff, behind the scenes trying to find David. She didn't really, because it was a touchy subject for her. to really sit there and describe, and then have to relive it over, because she could have lost both of her sons. I mean, she lost one, but she could have lost both of us. So it was kind of a touchy subject. It was something that she really didn't really talk about that much. It's like kept to her, because it was hurting. It was a hurting feeling to her. So she really didn't talk about it as much.
Shortly after David's disappearance, Vanessa received a strange but telling phone call.
That day or the next day, within a short period of time after David was stolen, Vanessa got a phone call at the house from a woman. Detectives now believe that this was the abductor. And it was a very brief phone call, and the person asked, what kind of formula is David on?
This phone call is important because if this person was David's abductor, calling his mother to ask what brand of formula he takes shows that David was likely being cared for and looked after. All of these traits are similar to the profile we discussed with Nekmek, a woman of childbearing age who wants to raise a child as her own. Another theory about this woman was that she was actively looking for any infant in the area. It was highly suspected that this woman used local baby announcements to find David, and someone matching her description was seen at a different home, running a similar scam in an attempt to take a child.
In the daily press, there was a list of birth announcements in the newspaper. And the theory is that this woman went through the birth announcements to find where there were going to be infant children. Sure enough, David's announcement was in there, which was common at that time. And then there's also information in the case file that says that a woman matching the same description, I believe, showed up at another house in the neighborhood where there was an infant, that mother told the woman no.
That is so terrifying.
It is quite terrifying, because you think about birth announcements. It's a happy time, you're excited to do it, but if you're in the business of selling babies and there's a birth announcement list, they use that to their advantage.
The next major development in David's case happened a few days later when someone reported finding David's baby bag.
Well, and then the other crazy part is the fact that they found David's clothes on the Colonial Parkway. So to give you some perspective, that is maybe about a 30-minute drive from David's house, from the family house. So this person had to have wanted to leave his things in an area where they thought no one would go looking. But someone found the diaper bag. They had to have tossed the diaper bag as they were driving.
When Jessica became interested in the case, she got investigators to take a fresh look at it, effectively getting it reopened.
When I saw the story on the Charlie Project blog and reached out to Newport News and shared with them the details, they broke out the case file, and that's when I was able to confirm everything and get additional information as well. And they were extremely eager to reopen the case and assigned Detective Amber Rogers to the case. I remember when she called, she said, "Oh my God, there is an evidence bag in our storage." And that was just an oh my God moment. That was incredible. And so when they laid out all of his clothes on the table and I got to go in and see it, it was just like, it was already real to me, but it was almost like he went back in time, because you see his little clothes. You see him as his mom last saw him when she put him in this woman's hands. Thank goodness the Newport News Police Department preserved that evidence as well as they did, because they were able to go back and do DNA testing, and that hasn't linked anything so far, but just in case something does happen and they need those records, they have those things. So that's huge.
That is huge. Do you know if they found any unknown person's DNA on there?
It looks like the hair that they found in the comb was David or Vanessa's, but it will help if there's ever a man one day that comes forward or is found, any type of testing to help confirm that he is David Blockett whenever that day comes. You look at the evidence, and the evidence may point this way or that way, but sometimes it's just a gut feeling that that person is out there. And I believe that David Blockett is alive, that he's out there, and I truly believe that he's going to be the one to come forward and say, I think this is me.
An early theory in the case was published in Ebony magazine in 1986. This article, which we have a link to on our website, discusses David and his abductor and published the police artist's sketch of her. The article suggests that David's abduction may have been a part of something bigger.
There has been other links drawn to try to get a grasp of things. That Ebony magazine did a feature on black baby abductions, and there was a theory then that there was a ring of people stealing black babies. And David's case was profiled in there as a question of was David's abduction a part of this black baby selling ring? We all had our theories about who it could possibly be, or was it a family that stole him, or was he taken and sold anonymously? There's just so many theories out there. But here's the other thing. If the person who took him still happens to be in the Newport News, Hampton Roads area, they've seen the story, and they know that it's on the radar again. I don't know if it's going to be a matter of us figuring out who David is, him figuring out who it is for himself, or the person who sold him one day coming forward and saying, hey, I can't take the guilt anymore. I have to tell you what I did.
Do you have any theories for what you think happened to him?
I believe David was sold because his dad had a whole lot of dirty dealings, from what I understand. And I believe that's one of the reasons why they got back at his daddy and to David, or his daddy had something to do with it. That's just my thinking. I'm not saying that it's true, but I just got that feeling, because it's just the type of person he was.
So Fred West, I knew from talking to Frederick Blockett that Fred West had, been in and out of jail, and I said, that's his only living parent. We have to, find him, and found out that he was serving time. We reached out to the jail and said, hey, do you think that, he'd be willing to talk to us about his son? And we did our first interview with him from behind bars. That was heartbreaking because Fred West, you can tell he has a good heart, hasn't made the best decisions in life, but you can tell his heart's in the right place, and he 100% regrets not being there. And so he carries that burden that, hey, if I hadn't been locked up and I had been home, David would have never been stolen. Fred West, David's dad, carries a huge weight on his shoulders. I know he dreams about a day that he'll meet David, and he dreams that David has done well and has lived a great life, and has had good parents and all those things.
With his mother's death in 1997, Frederick holds out hope that he will get to see his brother again.
David's birthday is in November. I was 3, and I'll be 39. So probably around 35, 36. I really, I really wished, and I know this was something that my mom wanted, to be able to see David again before she died. So me being the oldest, I do want the same thing. I want to be able to see my brother again, before I leave this earth. I'm looking at cases every day. I go to Walmart and look at the wall of people missing. It's not enough attention on that stuff. It's like these, they see it, and for the moment, it's hot, but then it just fade away. It's like people really just don't care anymore. anything when it comes to missing people, it should draw everybody's attention. Just imagine if that was your loved one, or that was somebody else's loved one, or somebody close to you. How would you feel? And that's how I look at it. I done been a victim of this. I know how I feel when somebody goes missing and you haven't seen them in a long time. People need that support because, you really don't know what can happen to your loved one.
When the case was reopened, there were new leads that didn't pan out. Do you know what those were and if they're relevant in any way?
There were some in terms of someone called and said, oh, the abductor looks a lot like this person, or, I think it might be this or that, and they didn't pan out. But I do believe that we're getting closer. It's just a matter of someone knows, and that person is going to have the courage to speak out. You never know what bit of information will trigger something in someone else to say, oh my God, maybe I'm his brother. He's in his mid-30s now. He may or may not be married, may or may not have kids. Starting to have certain questions that if his parents stole him, they're not going to be able to answer that. Things start to not add up. One of the incredible components of this is that David had some very distinguishing birthmarks. There's a birthmark on his back, there's a birthmark on his buttocks, and there's another birthmark, I believe, in his right ear. So you got to imagine if he happens upon this podcast and is listening to these details and starts to look in the mirror, and you have that moment like, oh my God, is this me? I really, really do pray for Frederick Blockett, for Frederick West, David's dad, for their other brother, for their family, that there will be closure, and a closure in the form of a happy ending, to where, David, wherever he is, and whoever he may go by now, that there is a joy in reuniting with the family and knowing where he comes from and knowing that he was loved.
I miss my brother. See, I wish we had a chance to grow up, together, so that, I know him, he know me. I just wish that we had that opportunity, but things happened, so we didn't get that opportunity. And I still got hope in my heart that he's still alive, and, I'm hoping that I can see him, be able to see him one day. Get down and sit down and talk to him and really tell him, how much he's loved and how much he was missed.
David Ezell Blockett was 15 days old when he went missing on December 11th, 1980. Today, he would be 36 years old. He has brown skin and had thick, curly hair as a baby. As Jessica mentioned, David had distinguishing birthmarks on his left arm, his back, and his buttocks. On the Charlie Project, it is noted that he had a mole on his right ear. If you have any information, please contact the Newport News Police. Contact information is on our website. You can also email us at thinairpodcast@gmail.com anonymously, and we will pass your information along. In addition to David Blockett, Charlotte Moriarty, Steve Carter's biological mother, also remains missing. Today, Charlotte would be 71 years old. When she went missing, she was with her infant son, now known as Steve Carter. She is a white female with thick, curly brown hair. You can find pictures and links to all the resources we used in today's episode on our website, thinairpodcast.com. Thank you to Steve Carter, Katie Spina, Jessica Larche, and Frederick Blockett for speaking with us on today's topic and stories. These are very sensitive stories of children going missing, and it really means a lot that especially Frederick Blockett and Steve Carter were willing to speak with us as they were personally affected by these issues.
We'd also like to thank our assistant producer, Nate Halda, for all the work he did in helping put this episode together, as well as our intern, Claudia Drace, for all her amazing interning work. We'd also like to thank our $15 tier Patreon donors who are honorary producers. They are Miss Della Pena, Bonnie Mortensen, Elizabeth Farmer, and Anthony Loper. Music in today's episode is brought to you by Blue Dot Sessions. To check out their collection of music, visit their website, sessions.blue. Thank you all so much. Without your support, all of this wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to become a donor, head over to patreon.com/thinairpodcast and choose your reward.
Join us again for a brand new missing persons case in 2 weeks.